South Australia's coastline isn't meant to look like this. Once pristine waters are murky and streaked with foam.
It moves, it changes, it is dynamic, and it is impossible to predict.
In the worst hit areas, vast populations of marine life have been lost in this algal bloom.
There is nothing under the surface of the water, and that should be a huge wake-up call for everybody.
It's an environmental disaster and a warning for the nation.
So what have you seen here in the last couple of weeks? Complete carnage. We've just seen the whole ecosystem wash up on the beach.
Desperate coastal communities can see their future.
If there's no fish, if there's no crabs, there's no customers for us.
Let's not scare 1.7 million South Australians from visiting the beach this summer.
With a state election this weekend, the South Australian government has been accused of playing down the health effects.
It's not toxic.
Do you still believe that?
Well, it's all about the context in which those remarks have been made.
There was a real desire to downplay the impact.
We pieced together what the SA government knew and what they told the public.
The information that I provided at the time was consistent.
But incorrect.
Well, in retrospect, we live in South Australia, we know this. I know you come from Sydney.
It was like razor blades in my guts. I was rolling around on the floor in the emergency room.
Poor bugger. It's all right, it's okay.
We as the public deserve to know these things.
The South Australian government insists this isn't toxic, but I've been here for just 10 minutes and already my eyes are watering. I can feel it in the back of my throat and my skin is itchy. This was meant to be over in a couple of weeks, but a year on, locals are still dealing with the algal bloom.
In March last year, a South Australian surfer noticed something odd at his local break.
I got out the car and I just had a bit of a taste in my mouth, like, you know, the day before you're getting a flu, your taste just a bit off. Water was beautiful coloured. I started just randomly doing a little dry cough here and there.
Anthony Rowland soon realised he wasn't the only one coughing.
I said, "Are you guys sick? Have you got a cough?" And they're like, "No, I've just started coughing out here today." And I'm like, "That's really weird, me too." So that's when the alarm bells started sounding and I knew something wasn't right, yeah.
He started posting about the symptoms surfers were experiencing.
We'd had almost 100 responses from the public of people that had been here or been to the car park.
And what were they saying? What were the responses?
They were all saying the same thing. They just rocked up and they felt a dry cough.
Definitely algae.
This is quite concerning. I was in panic mode. I knew it was sick and I was freaking out.
Got out the car and I instantly noticed something on the air.
Within days, local tradie Dale Madden says he ended up in hospital after swimming at a Victor Harbour beach.
By the time we got to the cliffs, it was quite a horrific smell and nothing I could really relate to. I then deteriorated quite quickly to the point of excruciating stomach pain where I was rushed to the emergency at Victor Harbour. They thought I had appendicitis. We then ran some tests and found out that I had an infection.
How painful was that?
Like 10 out of 10 painful. It was like razor blades in my guts. I was rolling around on the floor in the emergency room, coughing and spewing blood. So this was rough.
Diarrhoea as well?
Oh, yeah, horrific diarrhoea. That was, yeah, definitely the worst I've ever had, to the point of really scaring me. I said to the doctor, "It's the water. I reckon it's the water."
While Dale's infection can't be definitively linked to the algae, an international expert told us the bloom could bring on an illness like this. Dale says when he called the State Health Department to report his experience, they showed little interest.
When I further asked questions, I was basically treated as if, I was just some crazy person whinging about something.
All I can do is document and send the images through.
In the days that followed, Anthony Rowland was stunned by what he was seeing on the beach.
Not a leafy, but I haven't seen one of these guys for a while, and that just washed up in front of my eyes. You can see the bubbles are still like popping.
It was pretty shocking. The scenes that I was seeing was something I hadn't seen in 40 years.
Fur seal.
An algal bloom causing marine life to die and allergic reactions in swimmers.
Health authorities insist their allergic reactions won't trigger lasting health issues.
Hey, bud. Hello.
12 days after he began documenting the bloom, Anthony Rowland made a grim discovery.
Poor buggers. What's going on?
From 10 years old as a kid, from going down there to surf, there's always hundreds of roosts, like always. And whenever you get to the bottom, they all see you and prick up and they just divide and get away.
Yeah, so they're definitely not well, are they?
But there was some kind of poisoning or something was going on. They looked half paralysed.
Okay, mate. Oh, you've been there for a while, judging by your droppings.
He was so distressed by what he saw, he called the South Australian Department of Primary Industries.
Poor little thing is on his last legs, aren't you, mate? It's okay.
In fact, a government biosecurity team had already euthanased 45 kangaroos from this mob a few days earlier. They later reported the animals had shown mild to severe neurological signs. All up, 112 kangaroos would be put down.
And that night I just remember sitting in bed and looking through my footage, and I actually started feeling a bit sick, and then I couldn't sleep. Woke up the next morning and all I wanted to do was get back out there to see if they'd put them all down. But it was one of the most distressing scenes I've ever seen, for sure. Just so many of them suffering.
Yeah, this whole freaking population here is in jeopardy, I'd say.
So Anthony Rowland sent me the footage, and we're looking at tens, potentially a couple of hundred kangaroos that are showing really major neurological issues, and all at once.
Faith Coleman is an ecologist who's been training volunteers to collect water samples and document the algae's impact. Last month, she announced she's running as an independent at the state election.
The kangaroos, the footage was so distressing that a large number of both public and politicians were keen to get answers.
The public would never get a definitive answer on what made the kangaroos so sick. But there was one significant finding. Further testing 3 months later found a rare compound in the organs of 2 of the animals. It's called Brevetoxin. While the results didn't attribute the deaths to Brevetoxin, experts say the discovery deserved further investigation.
The presence of Brevetoxins in those kangaroos, how significant was that?
So we've never had Brevetoxins. It's also extremely rare anywhere in the world. So just our detection of Brevetoxins is a trigger for a full investigation for what the producing organism was, where it's distributed, how much of it is there. We need to know everything, yeah.
And should the public be informed about that, do you think?
Brevetoxins are certainly a problem for public health, and as a member of the public, I'd like to know if Brevetoxins are present.
The first algal species to be identified in South Australia was Karenia mikimotoi, but it was the discovery several months later of another species, Karenia cristata, that alarmed some scientists. It produces Brevetoxins that are released into the air and water. Fish absorb them and we breathe them in.
So we have some incubators down here.
Professor Shauna Murray is a globally renowned expert on harmful algal blooms.
So we'll take some of these to have a look.
Should we have a look at them under the microscope?
Let's do that.
Her team was the first to show the algae in South Australia produced a Brevetoxin.
So So it can cause a number of different human impacts. It can cause respiratory difficulties, including asthma, pneumonia, breathing difficulties potentially. So a potentially serious human health impact.
Despite regular press conferences, the South Australian government didn't immediately tell the public that brevetoxins had been found in the kangaroos. It took 2 months for details of the pathology report to appear on a government website.
They didn't want to scare the public because they knew that tourism and local small towns were going to suffer. I understand their motivation, but we as the public deserve to know the risk we are putting ourselves in.
The SA government told us trace amounts of brevetoxin were found in the kangaroos and their presence was incidental.
How are we doing this? 1, 2, cheers.
While the government was slow to reveal the brevetoxins in kangaroos, they were eager to identify what caused the algal bloom.
Hi, I'm Professor Mike Steer.
They released this explainer on TikTok.
The algal bloom occurring in South Australia is without precedent and has resulted from the convergence of 3 extraordinary factors.
The scientist leading the response blamed 3 events: a Murray River flood 2 years earlier, a marine heat wave, and an upwelling of cold water from the depths of the ocean.
These are the 3 elements that are fundamental to the growth and production of algae.
We check the cultures each week.
Professor Shauna Murray, who sits on the South Australian Scientific Advisory Panel, questions the government's explanation.
What about the idea there was a flood in the River Murray?
It happened at least a year before, so you wouldn't expect that something that happened a year prior would have a very strong impact.
So you discount that theory?
I think it's probably unlikely, yeah. We know so little about it that it's all just theories and it all needs to be investigated.
On what caused the bloom, would you caution people who are definitive, saying it's these 3 factors?
Absolutely. There's no way of knowing at this very early stage of the investigation as to what's caused it. It usually takes quite some research to be able to establish those kinds of things.
As the government sought to reassure the public, the bloom was spreading along the coast. After the first wave hit the beaches of Victor Harbour, the bloom spread to Kangaroo Island, up Gulf St Vincent and along the west side of Spencer Gulf. By July, almost a third of the state's coastline had been affected.
Of course it is devastating, but it's important to remember that over 2/3 of our coastline remains completely unaffected by the algal bloom.
One place undoubtedly affected was Adelaide. For months, dead fish and other marine life littered its beaches.
A shark measuring almost 3 metres long has washed up at Henley Beach.
A crowd quickly gathering to see the apex predator close up.
Authorities attended and removed the dead shark, taking it away for testing.
An investigation was promised into the shark's death.
Some experts concerned it could be connected to the algae bloom along parts of SA's coast.
But it took almost 4 months for the findings to be released after a Freedom of Information request. The pathology report revealed the same toxic compound found in the kangaroos. Brevetoxin was detected on the shark's gills. At 6 p.m. on a Friday, the pathologist delivered a clear warning. This is an uncommon and significant finding, the pathologist wrote in an email later released by the Department of Primary Industries. It suggested brevetoxins in the algae may have contributed to the shark's death.
What would have been the best scientific response on the discovery of brevetoxins?
I would have liked to see more testing, and I would have liked that testing to be public immediately.
Did that happen?
No.
The SA government says it tests deceased wildlife when necessary. But the discovery of brevetoxins raises questions that go beyond the impact on marine life. The toxin is known to affect human health, yet the state's health advice remained unchanged.
It was slow about changing the advice about whether it was a toxic bloom or not. I think most people, if they had been told that there was a nerve toxin in there, would have looked at that advice and made a judgment call themselves.
After discovering brevetoxins in the shark, it would take the state government almost 4 months to change its official health advice.
Were you slow to change the health advice?
No, actually, I think I was very quick. Going out and frightening people and saying, look, we found a little bit of this in a shark, when actually there is other reasons why that shark may have died.
Professor Nicola Spurrier is South Australia's Chief Public Health Officer.
This has been awful for South Australia. This is one of the largest harmful algal blooms internationally. But in the vast majority, these symptoms are very mild, minor, non-specific, and they disappear fairly quickly once the exposure goes away.
When a winter storm whipped up a powerful swell in August, the algal bloom crashed into Adelaide's beaches.
Oh, it's getting in the car.
Oh, it came in the window. Yeah.
As yellow foam blanketed the city's coastline, the government's health advice came under scrutiny at a 7-network forum.
My eldest, who is a non-asthmatic but never been in hospital, ended up in hospital for 3 days with respiratory issues, and I know she's not alone.
It is a question we've been hearing a lot. Professor Spurrier, what is your advice on this one?
You attended a community forum with the Premier. It was televised on Channel 7.
It's not toxic, but when you get it in your eyes, it's irritating, and that can cause those symptoms.
That's healthy people. What about people with underlying health concerns like asthma or pre-existing respiratory issues?
We don't believe that those people are at any higher risk. In Florida, where there's a Brevetoxin, they think that the toxin is more of a trigger for people with asthma, but we don't have that as a problem here in South Australia. Yeah.
You said we don't have that problem in South Australia. That was incorrect, wasn't it?
So at the time, and of course it's lovely to think back in time, but at the time we had a problem with Karenia mikimotoi. That was the cause of our algal bloom. At the beginning we had no Brevetoxin.
That's not what a key advisor to Nicola Spurrier was told in June. 2 months before the televised forum, he and 24 other government officials were told that while the dominant species was thought to be Karenia mikimotoi, brevetoxins had been identified for the first time in Australian waters. A summary of that briefing noted the impacts from the harmful algal bloom have potentially devastating implications for industries and human health. SA Health didn't say whether Nicola Spurrier was briefed about this, but the department insists it wasn't known at that point that a brevetoxin-producing species was dominating the bloom, or that those toxins were in the air.
You basically said, we don't have that problem in South Australia. You said there are no brevetoxins here.
Yeah. So I said exactly that because that was the case at the time. That was the understanding, the knowledge from the information that we had. Of course, now we can look back because we've collected all of that information. We've been able to check this information.
As a doctor, how can you make such a broad statement to totally dismiss that the brevetoxins caused that asthma?
So I'd suggest, Angus, that wasn't totally dismissed because we continue to follow up. Our team were in constant communication with them and we followed up with them and have had subsequent conversations with them. So the information that I provided at the time was consistent.
But incorrect.
Well, in retrospect, of course, we've now know, it's great now that we know, and I'm so pleased Sean has been able to quantify it, and we know it's from the Karenia cristata. And as soon as I had that information from that foaming event at Henley Beach, I used the precautionary principle and told the South Australian public about that.
Okay. We're more than happy to answer any questions if you've got questions of Chris or...
But it wasn't Nicola Spurrier who told the public when the health advice eventually changed.
We have early unvalidated results from the foam to indicate that there was a Brevetoxin-like substance present.
The catalyst for changing the health advice was the discovery of Brevetoxins in foam at Adelaide's Henley Beach.
But the health advice that we're receiving at the moment is that those people who are asthmatic, who suffer from asthma, would be suggested to responsibly take their Ventolin with them if they go down to the beach.
This was a significant change in the public health advice that went unnoticed for 4 days.
You have a role to play here.
Of course.
In communicating to the public.
Exactly.
And
South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas insists he's not responsible for the health advice.
why was the health advice changed in September?
Because our public health officials determined that it would be appropriate to change it.
What was the reason it was changed?
You would have to ask the doctors who crafted the health advice.
I find it a little extraordinary that the Premier of South Australia can't tell me why the health advice, a significant change in the health advice, was made in September.
Because public health officials made an informed judgment about the need to update health advice, and as soon as they make that judgment, I trust them in making that judgment. I share it with the public as soon as I can.
Sounds as though you're not really across the detail here.
Well, because I have never suggested or would seek to suggest that I'm a public health expert.
In this fishing town on York Peninsula, it's peak tourism season. But at the Stansbury boat ramp, we're the only ones heading out.
We've suspended our tours. We used to do the Decky for a Day tour.
Steve Bowley is a local oyster grower with a side hustle in tourism.
We used to bring visitors out, stand around and eat oysters. I just can't bring myself to do it because there's nothing here to show them. There's nothing to look at.
Stansbury was one of 3 oyster growing regions forced to close in May last year. The decision was made after brevetoxins were detected in the oysters.
It would have been super devastating if we found out about this brevetoxin because we were making people sick. There is no upside to selling a product into a market that makes people sick, and that the cost to industry of having done that would be enormous. So these are diploids that are...
This oyster growing region reopened in January after brevetoxin levels fell.
Eat it. Come on. It's not going to kill you.
Yeah.
They're not getting a very dire...
Most oyster farms have reopened, but the environment is yet to recover.
It is extremely depressing. I don't like coming out here.
When you look around here, what do you notice that's different from before the bloom?
There's no wildlife, there's no birds, there's no fish. At this time of the year, we would be dancing around, avoiding the crabs. There's not a crab to be seen. There is nothing under the surface of the water. And that should be a huge wake-up call for everybody, that the environment here is broken.
As the bloom flares on the other side of this peninsula, Steve Bowley fears the algae will return to these waters.
We're just hanging on with a thread, and yeah, don't ask me what's going to happen if we close again.
What does that mean for your business?
Well, it means I really don't have a business. The multiplier effect of something like this is just astronomical on the town.
What about if the bloom came here again? What would that mean?
It would be pretty bleak, because we could see then that there's no end to this, and no one's got any answers.
Local publican Rob Rankin worries about the town's future if the bloom drags on.
People are feeling affected by this. Stansbury's a beautiful regional fishing town. Families come here for holidays, and most of the holiday making is based around fishing. If there's no fish, if there's no crabs, there's no customers for us.
Algae bloom, look at that. That's what happens. That's what happens. Animals are dying.
Commercial fishing in this gulf was shut down in November. It's a crippling blow for fourth-generation fisherman Andrew Pisani. A year ago, he was one of the biggest operators in this region.
So if we threw a line over now, what would we catch?
Today here we catch nothing. No fish here at all. Yeah, the fish, it's over. There's just no commercial effort here at all anymore.
What do you think the future looks like for fishing in South Australia?
The ecosystem has fully collapsed, and to rebuild that ecosystem, it's unknown. It could take 10 to 15 years. So I don't think, for me and some of my fellow fishermen, that in the next 10 to 15 years we just won't be here.
Look, I might find a couple of fish. It's not enough to make a living from.
Ashley Perkins not only lost his livelihood, he became so sick fishing in Spencer Gulf, he now plans to leave the state.
Started out feeling like I had a weak cold or a weak flu. It deteriorated beyond that. Ultimately, you ended up with gastro, and bad gastro. And when it got really bad, it was very nasty cramps. You couldn't get too far away from the toilet.
How long did this persist for?
It continued through September and October. And by the time we got to November, I'd started to work out what was going on. I'd started stepping away from the fishing. I was trying to limit my exposure by reducing my hours on the water.
What happened when you left the area?
I headed over to Western Australia. Within 10 days, I felt normal, which I hadn't felt for 3 or 4 months. Breathing's good, chest was good, gastro issues had gone away completely.
In September, Ashley Perkins contacted a senior official in the SA Health Department. Ashley told the official he was suffering some health issues that come on within hours of fishing. 2 days later, he got a response. While he understood Ashley's concerns, the official said the only way he'd get those symptoms would be from ingesting toxins in shellfish.
They were not prepared to even entertain the concept that this could be making you sick by breathing in what we now understand is aerosolised toxins.
One study from Florida, where scientists have been researching toxic algal blooms for decades, found hospitalisations for gastro increased 40% during one particular bloom. SA Health dismissed that study as flawed and said further evidence was required to draw meaningful conclusions.
They really didn't believe what I was telling them, and they ultimately said to me, look, the only way you can be getting sick like you are is you are eating infected shellfish.
Had you been eating that?
Not at all. I'm not a shellfish eater, never have been.
We've talked to the people in Florida, actually, and we know what their research is. We've been extremely curious, been looking at all of the literature. I've been reading it, we've been collating it.
Do you acknowledge that for a small number of people, the symptoms are very serious?
These are non-specific symptoms, so there could be, in certain circumstances, another reason for that, okay? We have not had large numbers or even individual cases that I've been told about of people that have definitively only had the algae bloom, bringing them into hospital with these symptoms.
A month after the health advice changed, the Premier had this to say on ABC Radio.
A lot of people don't refer to the algal bloom as the toxic algal bloom. It's not toxic. If you went into the water and you encountered the algal bloom, you're not going to have any sort of severe, lasting health impacts. At worst, you'll have an irritation.
You said the algal bloom is not toxic. Do you still believe that?
Well, it's all about the context in which those remarks have been made, and context matters when you're communicating to the people of South Australia.
So is it toxic?
Well, the harmful algal bloom produce, in this place, with the Karenia cristata in particular, it does produce a brevetoxin, and of course by its nature, brevetoxin has toxicity and therefore is toxic. But it's also true that the algae itself, or elements of the algae, aren't toxic. You want to make sure you get the balance right by informing people without unnecessarily frightening them.
I would say to the South Australian Premier that this algal bloom is toxic, and it's been well documented that it's toxic.
Dr. Barbara Kirkpatrick has studied Florida's so-called red tides for almost 3 decades. Like the algae in South Australia, the Florida bloom produces brevetoxins.
These harmful algal blooms cause massive fish kills. They cause dolphin and manatees, mammals like ourselves, to either get ill or die from the bloom. So I think it's not a stretch that this is harmful to us as well.
SA health officials like to cite the experience of Florida, but it took them almost a year to contact Dr. Kirkpatrick.
We were able to document that emergency room visits go up during a red tide for respiratory illnesses, but also for gastrointestinal illnesses and for neurological illnesses such as migraines. We've had people who work on the water have reported over the years, whether it's fishermen, surfers, which I understand the South Australia is a big surfing area, having significant health impacts after repeated exposures.
Dr. Kirkpatrick's main area of research has been the algae's impact on asthmatics.
We studied about 100 people with asthma from the Sarasota area for 10 years. Just after a 1-hour walk on the beach, we could measure changes in their pulmonary function, their breathing, and they reported more symptoms, especially lower airway symptoms, such as coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath. And again, that was just after a 1-hour exposure.
The South Australian Government health advice says if you experience symptoms while at the beach, move away from the area and these will resolve within a few hours. But what about those who can't leave the area and have underlying health conditions? We're going to see one woman who struggles to breathe every time she leaves the house.
Every sunset, no two are the same. So it's like a picture postcard every night.
Kerry Sutton has lived above the beach in Adelaide South for 25 years.
Now, would you want to move away from this?
She has a chronic lung condition and says she was successfully managing it before the algal bloom.
Living by the ocean was actually good for my lungs and good for everything that goes on with me. And you used to be able to smell that beautiful sea salt that has always previously had a cleansing effect. That smell's gone.
Yeah, tell us what it's like to live here now.
Now, if I go outside and doesn't even have to be much of a breeze, the eyes start, the lungs are really tight, and it's sort of like a massive headache, and sort of going, okay, what's going on? Need to get my puffers, use the drugs for my eyes, but they're not helping.
Even on a day like this, when there's no visible algae, she's still affected.
Because I walked outside before, the eyes are stinging and burning, and that's not going to settle down for the rest of the day. It's in the air, you cannot get away from the air. When the wind's blowing, you'll see the foam up in the air blowing around. So it's not something that you can get away.
What's the advice you've got from your doctor?
He has suggested to me is that we get the disinfectant, and we actually hosed down the whole house with the disinfectant.
And has he directly said that the algal bloom is making your condition worse?
He has, yes, and he's a professor. So I would tend to think he knows what he's talking about.
Research from Florida shows brevetoxins can travel more than 4 kilometres through the air. In Adelaide, that would place around 200,000 people within range of the bloom, unable to simply follow the advice to leave the area if they have symptoms. Kerry Sutton now has a difficult choice.
Do you think you're at a point where maybe you do need to sell here and move away?
I'm stubborn. It would break my heart. It would absolutely break my heart if we did something like that. This is my forever home. And I would like to enjoy my forever home.
What about people that live on the beach who are constantly exposed to, as you say, the aerosolised toxins?
It's been terribly problematic. You're absolutely right. I feel very, very sorry for people because you can't get away from it. You know, you're living there.
After spending a week in Queensland recently, Kerry Sutton says her symptoms improved. We told Nicola Spurrier about her experience.
Every time she steps outside, her eyes water, she's tight in the chest, she gets a headache.
That wouldn't be consistent with the published literature. One of the problems with this is if people just put their symptoms down to the algae bloom, there may be something else that's not looked at. We can't really shift the whole of Adelaide up to the hills. It's not practical. You've got to be pragmatic with these things. We can give people information. We can't get rid of the algae any quicker, believe me.
I don't think it was good public health communication. Telling people to move 300 metres away from the coast doesn't make much sense in Adelaide, where so many people live on the coast, and the bloom was spreading up and down our metropolitan coast.
I was getting really bad respiratory symptoms.
Fran Bohm is a professor at Adelaide University. She lives on Henley Beach.
I couldn't breathe at night. I felt really, really breathless. I've never had that before. Had to get some Ventolin. So eventually we started wearing masks at home, and that was the experience of a lot of neighbours and friends at Henley Beach.
As an expert in public health, she's uniquely placed to assess the government's response to this crisis.
The initial advice was too optimistic. I think overall there was a real desire to downplay the impact. And I think that's because they were concerned about the impact on tourism, would stop people coming to South Australia, the impact on the fishing industry and so on. And it really was to the detriment of the mental health of residents who were actually very concerned about their health.
You are not going to suffer long-term health consequences. There will be an irritation that will largely disappear once you've had a shower.
And what was the scene on the beach like?
Well,
Professor Baum questions how the state government can say there are no long-term health effects when the evidence isn't there.
The conclusion that scientists come to is we simply don't know the long-term effects. So, you know, for a government official to say, well, it's not going to have a long-term health impact on anybody is a pretty brave thing to say.
They grow relatively quickly and they might double every day or...
In the early days of the South Australian algal bloom, Professor Shauna Murray was sent water samples to examine.
So you're looking at some cells of Karenia cristata that are swimming around, growing.
She assembled the team that formally identified Brevetoxin producer Karenia cristata in November. They found it is the dominant species in the South Australian bloom.
We had a group of about 25 scientists from about 10 different institutions. Everyone could see that this was a major event and were prepared to volunteer their time to research it and understand that fundamental information.
The South Australian government didn't fund the research team's work. But officials did ask the scientists to change the wording of their academic paper and remove a reference to severe human health effects. Professor Murray says the original wording was similar to other public health advice internationally.
Did you feel that was uncontroversial language?
Yes, I haven't had that before in a scientific paper.
Nicola Spurrier was one of the officials who weighed in. She requested changes to how human health impacts were described. Symptoms generally have been mild, resolving quickly, she wrote. Severe human health effects was replaced with acute and self-limiting human health effects. That's medical speak for saying any symptoms would be short-lived and don't require treatment.
So we were given a draft of it, and I provided some feedback about the level of symptoms that we were having in South Australia.
Why did you have such a problem describing the health impacts of the algae as severe?
Because in the majority of people, Angus, and this is the evidence, this is what we've got from our GPs, from our hospitals. We live in South Australia, we know this. I know you come from Sydney. I said to Shona, in actual fact, if you were in South Australia, you would see the same as I see.
It was about the potential impact of an algal bloom. So why did you edit that?
Because I've read all the literature and looked at the research evidence from Florida, and it is not severe in terms of the impacts on us as individual humans. As a community, of course it is, because, you know, so many people of us are impacted.
This government is going to put the accelerator to the floor.
A week out from the election, polls suggest Peter Malinauskas is a near certainty to remain in power.
Let's get out there and take it.
He kicked off his unofficial campaign in October with a plan to get South Australians back to the beach.
Today, the South Australian government starts to roll out our summer plan.
That summer plan was released without consulting the government's own scientific advisory panel. Four Corners spoke to 8 independent members of the panel who confirmed they never saw details of the plan before it was announced.
Did you consult any members of the South Australian Scientific Advisory Panel before putting out that summer plan?
Well, my expectation is the professor, Mike Steer, who was part of that panel, would be engaging with them in terms of how we invest in additional research going forward, which of course a very significant proportion of the summer plan was allocated towards.
So a number of those scientists say they weren't asked about that.
Who are they?
The scientists on your panel.
But which ones?
Well, I'm not going to, that's their prerogative to say that. So are you concerned by that though? Would you be concerned by that?
Well, I'd be concerned if the sky fell in, but I'm not going to comment on hypotheticals. They're understanding where the Brevetoxin comes from.
The SA government told us panel members took part in workshops and provided advice. A full briefing only happened 5 days after the summer plan was publicly announced.
The reality of the algal bloom sometimes isn't nearly as bad as people's perception of it.
This was the reality 3 weeks ago on York Peninsula, west of Adelaide. And the bloom is flaring again on Kangaroo Island.
There was a sense of doom. There was a sense of we've got this ecological crisis right on our doorstep.
We can't say with any...
Instead of trying to reassure the public that it had all the answers, Professor Bohm believes the SA government should have been upfront about what it didn't know.
We're still not entirely sure why we've had such a devastating, harmful algal bloom in South Australia, but it's likely to be a mix of climate change, of other ecological factors. We're going to have all sorts of system effects that lead to ecological disasters. And in South Australia, that's what we've been living. We weren't prepared. We hadn't done the thinking of what it would mean if an algal bloom of this type hit.
Experts warn that harmful algal blooms are likely to become more frequent and more intense. They say what's happening in South Australia is a warning for the rest of the country.
we've got an ecosystem collapsing here. Yes, it's sad, but it's much more than sad because it's actually the kind of life system that we all depend on. It absolutely is a wake-up call for us.